Laughter echoed through the Oakhaven auction barn when Aurora Thornton spent her last $500 on a trailer full of deformed, broken-down hens. Neighbors called her crazy. Rivals called her finished, but those twisted, discarded birds held $1 million secret that would soon bring the entire county to its knees. The smell of cedar shavings, stale coffee, and raw livestock hung heavy in the humid air of the Oakhaven Agricultural Center. It was a Tuesday evening, the night the commercial growers liquidated their liabilities. Aurora Thornton sat in the bleachers, clutching a thermos so tightly her knuckles were white. Her denim jacket was frayed at the cuffs, a silent testament to the financial ruin slowly suffocating Willow Creek Farm. She had exactly $542 left to her name. The bank had already sent the third notice. In 90 days, her family's legacy would be carved up into subdivisions. Down in the center ring, the undisputed king of Oakhaven's agricultural scene held court. Jeremiah Cobb, owner of Cobb Corporate Poultry, leaned against the aluminum railing in a pristine white Stetson and a tailored blazer that had never seen a day of actual farm work. Jeremiah's operation was a marvel of terrifying efficiency. Massive, windowless warehouses where hundreds of thousands of genetically identical white broilers grew to processing weight in a mere 6 weeks. They were perfect, uniform, and entirely tasteless, but they made him millions. "All right, folks, bring out lot 404, bellowed Bobby Jenkins, the auctioneer, tapping his microphone. The metal gates swung open, and a collective groan rippled through the stands. Even the seasoned farmers leaned back in their seats. Into the ring came a specialized transport trailer, and inside was a sea of absolute misery. It was Cobb's cull lot. In any massive factory farm, there is a percentage of genetic misfires. These birds had twisted beaks, splayed legs, asymmetrical wings, and patchy, molting feathers. Some walked with a heavy limp. Others had backs that dipped at odd angles. They were the crooked chickens, birds that didn't fit the automated processing machines and were practically worthless. Usually, they were quietly euthanized or sold off for pennies to be ground into pet food. Jeremiah Cobb grabbed a microphone from the auctioneer, flashing a blinding, predatory smile. "Now, neighbors, I'm not going to lie to you. These are the rejects. A couple thousand oddballs that didn't make the Cobb standard. They're eating my feed and taking up space. I'm starting the bidding at $200 for the whole lot. If nobody takes them, they go to the rendering plant in the morning." The crowd chuckled. Nobody in their right mind would buy 1,000 broken chickens. They would require too much space, intensive care, and the mortality rate would be astronomical. $200, the auctioneer rattled. "Looking for 200. Do I hear 200 for the cull lot? Come on, boys, they'll make good coyote bait." Aurora's heart hammered against her ribs. She looked at the cages. She didn't see coyote bait. She saw heritage genetics buried under industrial neglect. She had recognized something no one else had bothered to look closely at. These weren't the standard Cornish cross factory birds. Due to a supplier mix-up Cobb had loudly complained about weeks ago, this batch had a heavy percentage of Old World Ranger genetics, birds bred for foraging, sunlight, and longevity, not warehouse living. The factory environment had broken them, twisted their bodies under the stress of high-protein, rapid-growth feed they weren't meant to eat while trapped in the dark. If she could get them on grass, if she could just let them be real chickens. Aurora stood up. The bleachers creaked beneath her boots. $500, she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the murmuring arena like a gunshot. The entire barn went dead silent. 200 heads swiveled to look at the lone woman standing in the third row. Jeremiah Cobb pulled off his sunglasses, squinting up at her. A slow, mocking grin spread across his face. "Well, I'll be Abby Thornton. You sure you didn't hit your head on the steering wheel of that beat-up Ford of yours?" Laughter erupted. It was a harsh, rolling wave of mockery from the men who had spent years trying to buy her out. "500, Aurora repeated, her voice steady, though her knees trembled. "That's my bid." Sawyer Henderson, The grizzled owner of the local feed mill, who sat 2 rows down, turned around with wide eyes. "Abby, no," he hissed. "Those birds are crippled. Half of them will be dead by Friday. You're throwing away your last dime." "Do I hear 550? The auctioneer asked, a smirk playing on his lips. Nobody raised a paddle. Nobody would dare outbid the town fool, making the worst mistake of her life. "Sold," the gavel cracked, "to Miss Thornton, lot 404. As Aurora descended the bleachers to finalize the paperwork, Jeremiah stepped into her path. He smelled of expensive cologne and corporate greed. "You know, Abby, when the bank finally takes your land next month, I'm gonna bulldoze that cute little farmhouse of yours and put up 4 more grow-out barns. I'll make sure to dedicate a plaque to your crooked chickens." "Just load the birds into my trailer, Jeremiah," Aurora said coldly, pushing past him. The drive back to Willow Creek Farm was agonizing. The trailer clattered behind her old truck, filled with the soft, distressed clucking of 1,000 broken birds. When she finally pulled into her dirt driveway, the moon was high. Sawyer Henderson had followed her in his own truck, unwilling to let her do the heavy lifting alone. When they opened the trailer doors, the reality of her purchase set in. In the moonlight, the birds looked even worse. Their feathers were dull and matted. Some collapsed the moment their feet hit the grass, their muscles too weak to support their own weight. "Abby, look at them," Sawyer said softly, holding a lantern up. "They can't even walk straight. What in God's name are you going to do with 1,000 crooked chickens?" Aurora knelt in the dewy grass. A small, rusty-colored hen with a severely crooked beak and a permanent limp hobbled over to her, pecking hesitantly at a clover leaf. "I'm going to heal them, Sam," Aurora whispered, "and then I'm going to make this town eat its words." The first 2 weeks were a nightmare of back-breaking labor and sheer willpower. Aurora didn't sleep. The crooked flock required a level of intensive husbandry that modern agriculture had abandoned a century ago. Because they were battered and weak, they couldn't compete at standard commercial feeders. Aurora had no money left for high-protein commercial feed anyway. Instead, she leaned into the forgotten methods her grandfather had taught her. She struck a deal with a local dairy that was dumping expired buttermilk, trading her labor fixing their fences for barrels of the sour liquid. She combined the buttermilk with cracked grains, allowing the mixture to ferment in the sun. This lacto-fermentation broke down the phytic acid in the grains, creating a potent, easily digestible probiotic mash. Every morning at dawn, she dragged heavy troughs of the fermented mash out into the rolling, hickory-shaded pastures of Willow Creek. At first, the birds barely moved. They huddled near the coops, terrified of the open sky, their bodies trembling at the rustle of the wind. They had never seen the sun. They had never felt dirt. But nature has a terrifyingly resilient memory. By the 3rd week, the transformation began. The crooked hen with the twisted beak, whom Aurora had affectionately named Zigzag, was the first to venture into the deep woods. Zigzag discovered a grub under a rotting log, and a primal switch flipped. Soon, the entire flock was moving. They were still ugly. Their legs were bowed, their beaks were asymmetrical, and their feathers grew back in wild, chaotic patterns of rust, black, and gold. But as they roamed miles across the property, chasing grasshoppers, scratching through the mineral-rich forest floor, and eating the fermented dairy mash, their bodies underwent a radical internal shift. The constant exercise built deep, oxygenated muscle tissue. The sunlight thickened their bones. The forage turned their fat from a pale, watery white to a deep, rich marigold yellow, packed with beta-carotene and omega-3s. They weren't getting fat and bloated like Jeremiah Cobb's birds. They were becoming lean, robust, and fierce, but Aurora's financial clock was ticking rapidly. Healing the flock was one thing. Monetizing them before the bank seized the farm was another. The 90-day deadline was shrinking. She had exactly 3 weeks left until foreclosure. One afternoon, a sleek black SUV crawled up Aurora's gravel driveway, kicking up a cloud of dust. Jeremiah Cobb stepped out, flanked by two of his corporate managers. He looked around the farm with a proprietary sneer, his eyes eventually settling on the flock of crooked chickens scattered across the hillside. "Well, I'll be damned," Jeremiah laughed, leaning against his vehicle. "They're still alive, ugly as sin, but breathing. You running a charity for mutant poultry now, Abby?" Aurora wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her glove, gripping a pitchfork tightly. "You're trespassing, Jeremiah. I'm just getting an early look at my future real estate," he countered, pulling a folded document from his jacket. "I talked to Clara at the bank. You're defaulting at the end of the month. I'm here to offer you a cash buyout. Pennies on the dollar, of course, but it'll save you the humiliation of a public auction. Take the money, pack your bags, and get out of Oak Haven." Aurora didn't even look at the paper. "Get off my land." Jeremiah's smile vanished, replaced by a cold, hard glare. "You're a fool, Aurora. You can't sell those freak show birds to any processor in the state. Nobody wants meat from a crooked chicken. You're done." He got back into his SUV and sped away, leaving Aurora standing in the settling dust. He was right about one thing. The commercial processors had already refused her. Their automated machines couldn't handle birds of varying sizes and shapes. If she was going to sell them, she couldn't sell them raw. She had to sell them cooked. The Oak Haven Autumn Harvest Supper was the biggest regional event of the year, drawing thousands of tourists from the city who came for the corn mazes, the cider, and most importantly, the food stalls. Every year, Jeremiah Cobb sponsored the massive Central Pavilion, giving away deeply discounted fried chicken to cement his monopoly and flaunt his wealth. His chicken was famous by default. It was the only chicken anyone in Oak Haven ever ate. Aurora went to the town hall and spent her last $20 on a vendor permit. She was given a miserable 10 by 10 patch of dirt at the very back of the fairgrounds, right next to the portable toilets. It was an insult, orchestrated no doubt by Cobb's influence, but she didn't care. 2 nights before the festival, Aurora and Sawyer Henderson set up an outdoor processing station under the glow of heavy floodlights. It was time to see if the gamble had paid off. When Aurora processed the first bird, Zigzag, the little pioneer hen who had broken her leg in a fox attack 2 days prior, she brought the meat into her kitchen. Sawyer stood by, nervously twisting his cap in his hands. Aurora dredged the pieces in seasoned flour and dropped them into a cast-iron skillet of crackling lard. Instantly, the kitchen filled with an aroma that was aggressively, intoxicatingly savory. It didn't smell like the bland, watery frying oil of fast food joints. It smelled like toasted nuts, wild mushrooms, and deep, unctuous roasting meat. When Aurora pulled a golden brown thigh from the skillet and set it on a wire rack, the crust shattered under her fork. She handed a piece to Sawyer. The older man blew on it, took a cautious bite, and froze. He didn't speak for a full minute. He just stared at the bone in his hand. The meat wasn't the mushy, chalky white of factory birds. It was slightly darker, immensely juicy, and possessed a rich, complex depth of flavor that tasted like the very earth of Willow Creek Farm. "Abby," Sawyer whispered, his voice trembling slightly. What is this?" "That," Aurora said, a fierce fire igniting in her eyes, "is what a real chicken tastes like. And on Saturday, we are going to ruin Jeremiah Cobb." Saturday morning broke with a biting autumn chill, the kind of crisp weather that sent thousands of Oak Haven residents flocking to the fairgrounds. Aurora Thornton and Sawyer Henderson arrived before dawn, hauling 3 massive cast-iron cauldrons, cords of split hickory wood, and coolers packed with the processed meat of the crooked flock. Their assigned location was an absolute insult. Nestled against the chain-link fence at the farthest edge of the property, they were flanked by a row of humming portable toilets and a noisy generator. Down at the center of the fairgrounds, Jeremiah Cobb's corporate pavilion was a spectacle of towering inflatable chickens, neon signs, and commercial deep fryers the size of compact cars. Cobb's crew was handing out paper baskets of mechanically breaded, Perfectly uniform, chicken tenders to a line that already wrapped around the Ferris wheel. Aurora ignored the sinking feeling in her gut. She built her fires. As the hickory logs cracked and popped, she poured bricks of pure, rendered lard into the cauldrons. The fat melted into a shimmering golden pool. She arranged her prep station meticulously, a tub of the rich, yellow buttermilk from the local dairy, and a pan of stone-ground winter wheat flour mixed with smoked paprika, dried thyme, and coarse sea salt. By noon, the festival was at its peak. Bluegrass music blared from the main stage. The air was thick with the smell of cotton candy and Cobb's cheap frying oil. Down by the fence, Aurora had not sold a single piece. People would wander toward the back, wrinkle their noses at the portable toilets, and turn around before ever seeing her humble wooden sign that read, Willow Creek Heritage Farm, pan-fried supper. "It's the location, Abby," Sawyer said softly, wiping soot from his brow. "Nobody is going to walk past the dumpster to buy a $10 plate of chicken when Cobb is giving us away for $2. "Let the oil get hotter," Aurora replied, her jaw set. "And hand me that batch of dark meat." She dropped 8 massive, odd-shaped chicken thighs into the rolling lard. The reaction was violent and immediate. The moisture from the buttermilk hit the hot fat, sending a plume of fragrant steam straight into the autumn sky. Unlike commercial fryers that use deodorized vegetable oil, the hickory wood and pork lard created a profound, primal smoke. The aroma was complex, nutty, earthy, and aggressively savory. Then the wind shifted. A stiff autumn breeze caught the smoke rising from Aurora's cauldrons and carried it directly across the fairgrounds, cutting straight through the middle of the crowded central promenade. Arthur Penhaligon, a notoriously brutal food critic for the Chicago Culinary Review, was attending the festival on a begrudging assignment to cover rural American foodways. He was currently standing near Cobb's pavilion, holding a half-eaten chicken tender with an expression of profound sorrow. "It tastes like wet cardboard fried in engine lubricant," Arthur muttered to his photographer, tossing the tender into a nearby trash can. "Let's pack it up. There's absolutely no soul left in this town's agriculture. It's all corporate slop." Just as he turned to leave, the breeze hit him. Arthur stopped dead in his tracks. His nostrils flared. He closed his eyes, analyzing the scent profile drifting over the crowds. It didn't smell like commercial concession food. It smelled like his grandmother's kitchen in 1954. It smelled like real agriculture. "Follow that smoke," Arthur commanded, marching past the Ferris wheel and the petting zoo, his expensive Italian leather shoes kicking up Oak Haven dust. When Arthur arrived at the chain-link fence, he found a lone woman flipping uneven, strangely shaped pieces of chicken in a cast-iron cauldron. He approached the wooden folding table, looking skeptically at the handwritten sign. "This smells extraordinary," Arthur said, his sharp eyes evaluating Aurora's soot-stained face. "But these cuts, they are wildly asymmetrical. The bone structure is entirely disproportionate for a standard Cornish cross. What exactly are you frying?" Aurora looked up, unimpressed by the man's tailored trench coat. "They're old-world Ranger genetics, raised on lacto-fermented dairy mash, hickory woods, and pasture. They ran, they scratched, and they lived like real birds. The bones are dense because they actually use their legs." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "I'll take a thigh, dark meat." Aurora handed him a paper boat lined with checkered wax paper. Inside sat a deeply bronzed, craggy piece of fried chicken. It was heavy. Arthur picked it up. The crust shattered loudly in the quiet corner of the fairgrounds, echoing like a breaking pane of glass. Steam billowed from the meat, carrying the scent of buttermilk and thyme. He took a bite. Time seemed to suspend for the critic. The meat wasn't just juicy. It had a concentrated, poultry flavor, so rich it almost tasted like duck. The yellow fat rendered perfectly into the crispy coating. There was a minerality to it, a testament to the soil the bird had scratched in. It was, without a single doubt, the greatest piece of fried chicken Arthur Penhaligon had ever consumed in his 40 years of culinary exploration. He lowered the bone, staring at Aurora with a look of pure reverence. "My God," Arthur whispered. "You didn't just cook this. You built it from the ground up." He immediately turned to his photographer. "Get a picture of this stall. Get a picture of her. I am going to live tweet this to every chef in the tri-state area. And madam, I need 3 more plates, right now." Within 20 minutes, Arthur's loud praises had drawn a small crowd of curious onlookers who had grown tired of Cobb's flavorless offerings. A local bank teller bought a plate. A mechanic from town bought a plate. Each time someone took a bite, their reaction was identical. A wide-eyed stare of disbelief, followed by frantic chewing and immediate demands to buy another round for their family. The secret was out. The crooked chickens were a culinary masterpiece. By 3 o'clock, the dynamic of the Oak Haven autumn harvest supper had completely inverted. Jeremiah Cobb stood in his sprawling, brightly lit pavilion, with his hands on his hips, his face flushing a dangerous shade of crimson. His fryers were full, his warming trays were overflowing, but the velvet-roped queue was completely empty. "Where did everybody go?" Jeremiah barked at his terrified teenage employees. They're at the back, Mr. Cobb," a cashier stuttered, pointing past the Ferris wheel. Jeremiah stormed out of the pavilion. As he rounded the corner past the livestock barns, he stopped cold. A line of nearly 400 people snaked away from the portable toilets, wrapping entirely around the southern perimeter of the fairgrounds. People were laughing, sharing bites from paper baskets, and holding up their cell phones to snap photos of the humble wooden sign. At the front of the line, Aurora Thornton was moving like a machine, her face smeared with flour and soot, plunging batch after batch into the bubbling lard. Sawyer was frantically making change out of an overflowing metal lockbox. Jeremiah's blood boiled. He recognized the heavy, asymmetrical cuts of meat in the customer's hands. She was selling the mutant birds, his rejects, and she was stealing his town. "Shut this down," Jeremiah roared, shoving his way to the front of the line. He was trailed by Brenda Higgins, the anxious festival coordinator. "Brenda, I demand you pull her permit. These birds are agricultural anomalies. They're diseased. They're the culls from my factory. They aren't fit for human consumption." The crowd grew violently silent. Customers holding half-eaten pieces of chicken paused, looking between the enraged corporate tycoon and the exhausted female farmer. Aurora slowly set her metal tongs down on the table. She didn't back away. She walked right up to the front of the stall, standing inches from Jeremiah's tailored blazer. "They weren't diseased, Jeremiah," Aurora said, her voice carrying clearly over the crackling fire. "They were starved of the sun. They were locked in your suffocating concrete boxes and fed garbage that destroyed their bones. I gave them green grass and fermented grain, and they became something your millions of dollars could never produce. They became real food." "You're a fraud, Abby," Jeremiah spat, pointing a trembling finger at her. "I own this town's poultry market. Brenda, if you don't shut down this unsanitary circus right now, Cobb Corporate is pulling all our funding for the county fair next year." Brenda wrung her hands, looking terrified. "Aurora, maybe you should pack up. We don't want any trouble." "She's not packing up a damn thing," a booming, cultured voice echoed from the side. Arthur Penhaligon stepped out from the crowd, dabbing his mouth with a linen handkerchief. He looked Jeremiah Cobb up and down with an expression of withering disgust. "And who the hell are you?" Jeremiah snapped. "I am Arthur Penhaligon, senior culinary critic for the Chicago Culinary Review, and I have just spent the last hour on the phone with the sourcing director for the Vanguard Restaurant Group, the largest syndicate of Michelin-starred establishments in the Midwest." Arthur stepped between Jeremiah and Aurora, turning his back entirely on the corporate boss to face the stunned farmer. "Miss Thornton," Arthur said formally, "your methodology is revolutionary. The flavor profile of your flock is unparalleled in the modern American market. Vanguard wants an exclusive contract for Willow Creek heritage birds. They are prepared to offer $22 a pound, wholesale." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Jeremiah Cobb sold his factory meat for 80 cents a pound. Furthermore, Arthur continued, pulling a pristine leather checkbook from his trench coat, they have authorized me to write a $25,000 retainer to secure your next 2 flocks, effective immediately. Arthur signed the check with a gold fountain pen and laid it on the wooden table right next to the flour bin. It was more than enough to pay off the bank. It was enough to rebuild the farm. Aurora stared at the piece of paper, her hands trembling. The weight of the last 90 days, the sleepless nights, the mocking laughter, the desperate gamble on a trailer full of broken creatures suddenly washed over her. She looked at Sawyer, who had tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "You can't do this," Jeremiah screamed, his voice cracking with panic. "Those are my cast-offs. This is a sham." Arthur slowly turned his head to look over his shoulder at Jeremiah. "Mr. Cobb, your product is a tasteless industrial tragedy. You wouldn't know quality if it walked out of your own warehouse. Now kindly step aside. The lady has paying customers waiting." The crowd erupted into deafening cheers. Someone at the back started clapping, and soon the entire line was applauding. Jeremiah Cobb stood frozen, completely humiliated, before turning and retreating toward his empty, glowing pavilion, his empire of cheap meat suddenly feeling entirely worthless. By sunset, Aurora had sold out completely. The cauldrons were empty, the lard was cooled, and the heavy lockbox was overflowing with cash. The air was still thick with the lingering scent of hickory smoke. As they loaded the truck in the twilight, Aurora looked out over the quiet fairgrounds. She had saved Willow Creek, but more importantly, she had proven that value isn't dictated by an assembly line. The crooked flock had been thrown away by a broken system, just as she had almost been. But under the open sky, given time, care, and a chance to heal, the broken things had proven to be the most extraordinary of all. If this story of Aurora's incredible triumph against corporate greed inspired you, make sure to hit that like button. We believe in celebrating the underdogs and the forgotten things that rise to greatness. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that your darkest moments can lead to your biggest victories. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, heartwarming stories of resilience and redemption, uploaded every single week.